All the roads are windy.
Welcome to the show, Erica. I'm stoked to finally get to talk to you. I was like, how have I not had an Erica on the show yet? You know, because I've been loving HausWitch for years now. So welcome.
Well, thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
Sweet. So before we begin, I would love to hear, what are your ancestral lineages? Who do you come from?
Yeah, so pretty much entirely from Germany and Austria. I have been actually doing some research into my ancestry lately, and I've traced pretty much everybody back to Germany or Austria. I do have like a sprinkling of Irish on my mother's side, but in general, we're Germans. We're proud of it. Yeah.
Cool. And where do you live now, and who are the people of that land?
So I live in Salem, Massachusetts, which was originally Massachusetts land. And it was it's definitely a melting pot, was a melting pot. You know, we've got the Wampanoag, which was south of here. Um, but predominantly Massachusetts.
Cool. Yes. So I think it'd be nice to share this for anyone who's not familiar. You know, you're in a really special spot. It's a hot spot
Which
for
city?
witchery. Which city?
City.
Yes. Do you just want to share a little bit, like, what is HausWitch and what, you know, where are you and why is that special? Just give a little context here.
Yeah, sure. So obviously, Salem, Massachusetts is known um, mostly for the witch trials that happened here in 1692 and 1693. But since then, there has been sort of a reclaiming of the town by witches, for witches. And it's this really kind of magical intersection of the fact that we have a huge tourism industry here because people are interested in, I would say, witches even more than just the witch trials. And there's a lot of sort of popular culture that gets conflated with the witch trials and with Salem, Hocus Pocus, the seminal film Hocus Pocus being one major thing that, you know, some people kind of come here and are like, where did the Sanderson sisters live? And we're like, well, I mean, we can show you where they filmed Hocus Pocus, but so there's that. And then obviously the Crucible, which even doing my own research into the Salem witch trials, I hadn't realized how much of what I knew about the actual trials was conflated with kind of the Crucible, which is, you know, more of a dramatic retelling of the witch trials, putting a lot of kind of like personal responsibility on folks, I would say, instead of maybe like the systemic stuff that was in place and was really behind the trials. And I would say, you know, it's sort of like a place where people are really, you know, they want the sexy vibe, not sexy in terms of like sexuality, but in terms of, you know, people come and they really, you know, they want to see, you know, I don't know what they want to see. I do and I don't. You know, I think that people definitely have a romantic version of like what witches and witchcraft looks like. And there are definitely some places in town that cater to that and do a great job. You know, we're at HausWitch, which comes directly out of sort of my experience in my graduate program, which was in gender and cultural studies. So HausWitch kind of comes out of more of a place of wanting to really get into those systemic things and how they're still operating in our world today. And just really leverage, you know, people's interest, people's sort of vague interest in witches, which is what they come here with. And channel that into maybe something, some more awareness around what do people in 2022 who identify as witches, like what are they doing with that identity? Why does that matter in the big picture? Which, to me, sort of a very simplistic way of saying it is that, a witch is sort of always someone who is othered. And I think that's so important still. That's such an important idea. And to identify now with this archetype is to really, it is such um, an act of rebellion, really. And so getting into kind of why that's the case and, just again, like how a, ref, a reclaiming of that othering, to say, look, I'm living outside of your capitalist expectations of me. I'm living outside of your patriarchal expectations. I'm living outside of your white supremacist, bullshit, because I'm a witch. Um, that was probably didn't make a ton of sense, but I hope it did. Anyways, so long story short, my goal with HausWitch, like I said, is just to kind of take this, wide net of people who come here. And if they come to my store, I want them to get a little education into um, how the word witch has been used to victimize people, how it can be used to reclaim and empower people, and why it is the perfect antithesis to our current cultural, political, social, economic uh, conundrum that we're in late stage capitalism. So, yeah, I kind of like to say that my store is like my PhD. I have a master's degree, but I never went on to get a PhD. And I like to kind of say that the store is my PhD. And I'm always kind of, it's, a living, growing, changing thing that um, is a lot of, it's very fulfilling for me in terms of continuing those ideas that I went to grad school with.
It makes sense. And like just looking at what you've created and having followed you, HausWitch is this beautiful store with things you can buy for your magical practices and to entertainment and comfort and self-care and all these things. But it's very clear that you're like, let's keep it real, but make it fun. And, it sounds like all of this is applied. You're taking these things that, in the institutional silo of a PhD might be very theoretical, but you've just taken them. And actually, I love that you call it your PhD because it's applied and having an actual impact out there, and bringing all these concepts to life.
Yeah, I had a reading once, and the person told me that I was a bridge person, and I could really relate to that because I didn't really fit in within academia, mostly because like what I wanted to study was like magic, which is like kind of the opposite of academia, and I'm just not a person that can really get into like minutia in the way that academics can. And I don't mean that as like shade at all, because honestly, I think academics are like literally the coolest people in the world. And I idolize them so much. And I wish I could, I'm sort of a failed academic because I just don't have the attention span. I just don't have that ability to like see the very nitty gritty stuff that, people base genius, amazing careers on. And so I'm much more comfortable in that role of being the bridge person and being able to say, like, okay, I'm going to take what Sylvia Federici says about the witch trials and capitalism and, the sort of commodification of women's bodies. And I'm going to translate that into some sort of bite-sized nuggets that, a tourist that might just plant a seed in somebody's head that really takes them to a new understanding of themselves and their position in this world, and ultimately empowers them to maybe, take some action, or, just contribute in some way that they hadn't been before to, collective liberation, if that's not too high-minded of an idea, and I love that job. I mean, I love my job very much. I love that part of my job. It feels very much like my destiny. Um, and it's really fun, because again, Salem is a place where we celebrate witches. And that, to me, there's just endless opportunity within that idea, I think, for talking about resistance and rebellion.
I mean, this makes total sense to me because at Earthspeak, we're all about earth magic, and we aren't as overt about witchery, but I've identified as a witch since kindergarten, so one of my earliest memories. But like as a path to collective liberation through personal liberation and through impacting the system is this, the whole spectrum. And it's tangled, it's big. It's not something that's any one person or any one lifetime, but it's each of us combined. And so it makes sense to me. And I think a lot of our listeners too get it.
Yeah. And even within the idea of the witch contains multitudes, right? I mean, and it's such a slippery subject because depending on the context, you're either talking about, sort of hapless victims of really like class warfare,
major sexism
and major sexism, of course. And I mean, yeah, like understatement. And, or you're talking about actual sort of like herbalists and midwives and cunning folk, or you're talking about Wiccans, or you're talking about, like political witches. So it's, or you're talking about sort of the pop culture like construct, so it's hard to talk about with, it can be hard to talk about and do a good job, but that's why we really try to cover, as many different inroads as we can in terms of like what we offer at the shop, because I really want everyone who comes in there to leave, like I said, with that kernel of something where they're thinking about something in a way they never have thought of before. And I think that's exactly what, witches and witchcraft as this sort of like ultimate outsider. I think that so many people who maybe aren't as immersed in this kind of community as, you and I, don't have the bandwidth necessarily to question some of these things, or don't have the bandwidth to read a whole book on some of these things. I'm out here on the East Coast. We're busybodies, we're city slickers, we're cynics, we're critics, we're, these people that come to my shop aren't all buying in. You know what I mean? I mean, some of them are just here on a lark. Some of them are just here because Salem in the autumn is like the quintessential, like East Coast, autumnal paradise. But I want everybody to leave thinking a little bit about something differently than they have before. And like I said, I just think like the witch offers a million opportunities to get people to do that.
Cool. I love that. So something I want to get into, if you're into this, is I've noticed like in Earthspeak and the people that listen to this and the people that are in our communities and come to our workshops, even if just looking at them and talking to them for like 2 minutes, you're like, whoa, you're so witchy. There's still a lot of resistance or self-doubt around owning or claiming that as an identity for self. And I've heard from people a lot around like, I don't know if I'm witchy enough to call myself a witch, or they are afraid. And there's still so much of that witch wound of the fear of, being burned metaphorically or literally burned at the stake. And I'd love to hear some of your thoughts and perspective on this. Do you see this happening as well, of people not sure if they're worthy and also being afraid?
I mean, I feel like that sometimes. Not necessarily the afraid, but like even when I'm going to do, interviews like this and, there's usually a question of like tell me something that you do in your life that's super witchy, and not only does just like getting put on the spot like immediately empty my brain, but in a lot of ways it's kind of so intertwined with just how I live my life that I don't really even think about it. And so I definitely have the vibe of like, am I witchy enough? I'm not necessarily like a nature witch because again, like I've grown up in cities and I've lived in cities, and so I don't connect as easily with some of the like natural world that a lot of my like very witchy friends do. Also being from the Midwest, I like find this so funny with my friends out here is that they're all obsessed with the ocean. Like every one of my witchy friends is obsessed with the ocean. They get completely like revived and replenished, and they're like, I just have to get to the ocean. I'm feeling so out of sorts. I have to get to the ocean. I don't I don't have that. I mean, maybe
Do you have to go to the Great Plains?
I have to go to the Great Plains. I love the big sky vibe. Like that is way more of like my vibe. Um, and I like chased tornadoes when I was in undergrad. And so I'm much more of a thunderstorm. Like a thunderstorm is my kind of ultimate like elemental um thing. Uh and so I often am like, well, I don't have this great knowledge of like herbalism, and like I don't know which trees are which and like stuff like that. And so I question it too. And ultimately, years and years ago, when I was first sort of re-engaging with this world, because I definitely took a break from it for reasons we may get into, but mostly having to do with just accessibility. Um, when I started bringing witchcraft back into my life in my late 20s, I happened to find a book by one of my all-time favorite people, Kelly Catrone. And the book is called If You Have to Cry, Go Outside. But it has tons of amazing kind of like spiritual um, advice in it. And she identifies as a witch because of the acronym Woman in Total Control of Herself. Now I don't love kind of like non-inclusive gendered language like that, but at the same time, it helped me kind of latch on to this idea of like a witch doesn't necessarily have like it doesn't necessarily have to correspond to like knowledge. Again, then we're getting into hierarchy, we're getting into accessibility, we're getting into all these things that I don't think have anything to do with witchcraft. And so then we're getting into these like qualifiers, and it's like who gets to qualify people? Like what's the qualification? And I probably wouldn't even buy into it if there was one. And so if you want to be a witch, like be a witch. And again, if it has to do with just not feeling worthy, you're worthy. I'm here. I'm telling you, I've got my big witch energy sweatshirt on. I'm in the heart of Witch City. My job is being the head witch in charge. I am telling you, if you're out there and you're wondering, you are a witch. You can be a witch. You can call yourself a witch. I said so. Um, but that's also a really privileged thing to be able to say, because there are still people around the world being persecuted for being witches. And so that's why I think you also, if you are going to call yourself that and be empowered by that, then I would just ask that you also think of, what it means to wear that mantle of oppression and what you can do in the world to try to push back against those forces of oppression, inequality, marginalization, persecution. Um, and that's all I would ask of you in exchange for your witch card, your witch credentials. Just like, please do some like activism or social justice work. But call yourself a witch, it's great.
Thanks. And thanks for sharing, your own personal vulnerability around like you still have that kind of doubt. And especially because you're not necessarily a green witch or hedge witch. And like that speaks to how there is no homogenized witch. It's not just what does it look like or what are you interested in. It's different than that. And you've spoken to that and touched on that here. So thanks for giving permission too, just through your own example, to folks who maybe aren't, into plants as much as some other,
Yeah, city witch, I mean, it's a thing. I'm a business witch. I'm a political witch.
Your house witch.
I'm a house witch. I was just going to say, I was like, I'm a domestic witch, So yeah, there's all sorts of different ways. And ultimately, I think the one thing you have to be striving for is to just be more empowered in your life. That's, I think, the nugget that no matter what your interests are, no matter what your kind of, what you see as your tools on that path or anything like that, I think just the goal is self empowerment and for the ultimate goal of being able to make changes in your world.
Yes, yes, yes. I would love to get into some house witchery. And, I'm more on the definitely green witch, hedge witch, but also like just kind of like
your space is beautiful from what I can see of it.
Thank you. Thank you. What you can't see is the pile of mess I shoved in the corner that you can't see on Zoom. So I'm like, I want to be more house witch, but I'm not. And I would love to hear, it just seems like too much. I'm like, whoa, it's like way too much. Like, how do you even start? So I'd love to hear just kind of like what lights you up? Like, what is it about? Because I get it. Like, I have 7 furry fake fur blankets in my house because like I get like a certain comfort things, but it gets all complicated in my head. And so I appreciate the magic of folks like you who can like perceive the bigger picture and the vision and bring it to life, because this is like not my skill. So I'd love to hear like what lights you up about house witching, domestic witching, and yeah, I guess just start there and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah, I think it definitely like stems from this, not that it has to be like a dichotomy, but like this idea that like I really wasn't out I'm really not like an outdoor cat, I'm definitely an indoor cat. And when I was younger, it just felt like something I just tapped into naturally, just wanting my space to feel a certain way and appreciating the aesthetics of a space. My mother like definitely cared about this stuff, and we always put a lot of effort into like my bedrooms. Like I had a jungle bedroom. I had a like kind of Jackson Pollock. We like splatter painted all the walls room. And so, I definitely learned that, that was a place to channel creative energy too. And it all felt really good. And I talked about this a little bit in my book, House Magic, Transform Your Home with Witchcraft. Where I was a really anxious child and I had I have, definitely some family trauma. And I think that it was really a way for me and my little Pisces moon to ground, and to really feel like some kind of connection where I think that I often felt pretty like untethered, I would say. And so it's just kind of something that I've always been interested in. And then when I was in college, after I moved out of my family's house and I was in college, and I come from a working class background. I worked full time all through college and grad school. And so I always wanted my space to be really beautiful, but I didn't have any money. And so that's kind of where the very like first little seed of House Witch started, was just that, people would kind of come over to my house and be like, oh my God, your house is so awesome. Like, how'd you do this? And, it's like, well, it's car tires and chicken wires kind of like scotch taped together, but like, and being that, I'm an elder millennial, so my peer group is just like kind of broke, or like we finally are all starting to like buy houses and have babies, but I'm like going to be 40 in June, so we've really all got kind of a late start on that. So that's been my audience, right? Is there is a huge demand for this idea of like, you don't need a ton of money to make your space feel good. And I think that, two things, which is that the entire like interiors industry is based around rich folks because that's how decorators make money. That's how furniture companies make money. That's how different, stores and home goods companies make money is from rich people. And so it's all catered toward rich people. And I find that incredibly boring. Of course, the spaces are beautiful, in like Elle Decor and in all of these kinds of like magazines, of course. But how boring when you can just buy beautiful things and put them in your beautiful space. Like, well, duh, it's going to look beautiful. I'm so much more interested in, vintage furniture is like my obsession. And I love it because it's like A, very eco-friendly, and B, it's this definitely a magical manifestation practice of like, okay, I need a, coffee table to be a very specific size and shape. I've searched every website on the internet, but vintage can bring that into your life. Like it can bring completely unseen and unimagined things into your life. And that just feels so magical to me. Um, so I love the idea of talking about that more. And I love the idea of just that you can shift the energy in your space without spending any money, and you can really shift the aesthetics of it without spending that much money either. It's all about intention, which is again, just kind of at the heart of like a witchcraft practice as well. And so where those two things come together is really where I, get lit up, as you're saying, and being able to just figure out those ways of adding intention into your everyday life or adding just these tools that help you connect to something bigger. I think aromatherapy is kind of like my other passion, which is why, we sell a lot of scented candles and we make our own scented candles and other kind of like aromatherapy products, because I think that's another thing that can help people kind of transcend the like more mundane aspects of life. And it's funny because I have a very, very close friend who just went through a really traumatic breakup from a long-term relationship. And he just could not order enough candles for me. And I would go over to his house and be like, oh my God, like, look at all these empty jars. Like you've already like burned through this. And he was just like, the comfort of the smells and just like making my house smell more like home has been so comforting to me during this time. I think that's magic. And so there's all these kind of blurred lines between, what is considered kind of like domestic drudgery and magical practice. And that's, again, I think where I like to be the bridge person, and kind of translate those ideas.
I'd love to hear, in transforming one space without having to, spend any money or be at the level of Elle Decor or Architectural Digest. What are some guiding points you might have for someone as they are setting that intention? Like, let's take me, for instance. Like I'm like, okay, I got my office here. It's also a guest room. And I know it can be so much better, but I just don't even know where to start.
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely like vision boarding, find out what you respond to in spaces. Is it just working with the natural light? Because again, like natural light can be just like, that's kind of on my list when we're looking for places, which we just bought a condo in 2020. So hopefully I won't be looking for spaces for a long time, but hardwood floors and natural light, those are my two like non-negotiables. And that's like another way of like completely free, like just utilize the natural light in your space. If you have a big window and you have like, like old, window blinds that your landlord put in like a million years ago or something like that, like maybe just take them down, and like get some shears to like throw across when you need to like change your clothes or whatever. But lighting is really important other than natural lighting. One of my big things, and I say this in my book, is like never ever flip that overhead light on in your life. Never ever touch it. Just get rid of it. Get a lamp. I don't care. Go to Goodwill, go to the thrift store. I don't care. You don't have to spend that much money, but get some lamps. Every room should have 3 light sources that aren't that overhead light. What that does is it creates a vibe, right? I mean, it creates a very cozy feeling. So again, like I guess you're buying lamps, but like I said, I mean, I'm out here like get vintage, and nowadays you can find so much. Like I found a kitchen table that I probably would have bought new from CB2 at the vintage resale shop. So you can actually, and even on Craigslist too, and Facebook Marketplace, like a lot of times you can search for like an exact model of something from IKEA or West Elm or Crate and Barrel or any of these stores that are making stuff, with slaves out of, the earth. You can find that stuff secondhand for much cheaper, and it's already put together, and you're not using these resources that are so limited, and we just keep abusing that. So those are kind of like my big things in terms of like not spending a lot of money, and just also for art, everybody has a postcard that they love. Okay, we'll get a big, if it is a postcard and you need a big wall, to fill, buy a big frame with a big mat. It will look so chic, I promise you. Everybody has a love letter. Everybody has a something that you can frame and make art of. You don't have to buy everything from like Society 6 or like whatever. Again, I like an occasional Society 6 moment, but there are just, it's like the Magician tarot card, right? It's like you actually have everything you need probably laid out, and it's just about the intention that you put behind it. And I think your space looks beautiful. And I think that, the clutter aspect, please, I definitely have piles. My wife and I have a pile that always accumulates in the corner of our kitchen, drives us nuts. We've put lots of different systems in place. We've tried everything, and yet the mail piles up, and every random thing that we don't want to deal with piles up. So nobody is perfect at that stuff. I mean, maybe people that have like a ton of like domestic help or something, but I think just being gentle with yourself and just knowing that like that will make your space feel a lot better if you're dealing with your clutter. It's just like mental clutter. It's just like emotional clutter, energetic clutter. It's gonna drag some of your life force energy towards it, and it's gonna, in a, probably not very productive or helpful way. So, yeah, and it's all in my book, which is very meant to be for kind of beginners and really simple ideas. And yeah, you can do a lot with nothing. So
Love that. I can attest. I just cleaned out my hallway closet, which is also my little apothecary, and it felt so good. I was like, how did I wait so long to do this? So,
but everything happens right on time, I think.
Exactly.
I mean, and I want everybody to just be so gentle with themselves right now. Just like don't, for any reason, don't beat yourself up. I mean, as long as you're not like a bad person, but like, if you're just like a person out here trying to survive right now and you have like a pile of junk mail on your counter, that's okay. That's all right. You'll find a folder for it at some point. Just be kind to yourself.
I love that. We could all use that, I think. So you recently I was just reading your blog post from your recent newsletter, which I really appreciate your newsletter, so everyone go sign up for it. But you were talking about how you like to splurge once a year on something that doesn't directly in your business, that doesn't directly have to do with increasing sales or something. Like there's like you're investing into the energetics of it in a way. And you were also talking about how this year you were making over your kind of office space, which is separate from the actual shop. And you mentioned that you had some resistance too and scarcity stuff and like self-judgment around that. So I'd love to hear, what are some of, first of all, what's the project that you did? And then also, what are some of those thoughts? Like, even if you have, maybe can walk us through like, oh my gosh, I wanted to have this, but I had this thought come up, and what's happening in there? Can we see some of that?
Yeah. So we have an office space across the street from the shop. It's New England, so you take whatever real estate you can get. And the nice thing about this building is that it has an elevator so that we can be moving merchandise, because we also have to keep our extra stock here. I don't have any extra space at the store, other than what you see. And we ship all of our online orders out of this space as well. So again, this elevator thing is like very important. And we're right across the street from the shop. And we upgraded. We were in this building for a few years in a much smaller space. And then we upgraded in 2020, which luckily we got a nice deal because we were the only company in the universe actually like wanting more office space in 2020. But at the same time, bigger space, more to do. And we have really high ceilings in this space. We have gorgeous big windows, but it's like all painted landlord beige and it's all gray carpeting. And so it felt a little daunting in terms of like, how do we maximize, whatever money I decide to put into this, to really make the space kind of transform. And so luckily, one of the most magical things about HausWitch is the network of people that have kind of coalesced around it. And my friend Morgan Elliott, who has a huge hand in all of our branding and illustrations, our Winnie the Witch mascot is her creation, and her husband Jordan is also an incredible visual artist and illustrator. And so I tagged them in, and they had much bigger ideas than I did, which is like, again, for any business owner out there, like the moment when you just have to realize that like you don't have all of the good ideas and just like let the experts do what they do. I'm here to welcome you to that moment if you haven't reached it yet. Like it's a really nice moment. And so they painted a bunch of walls with our brand colors and added illustrations. And that made such a huge impact, and it was like just a few gallons of paint. But, and they painted, you can see my wall in my office here, black, which I was like, a black wall, but we want to keep everything looking so nice and bright. We have these huge windows. And it's like, yeah, we have these huge windows. Like we get a ton of light. So a black wall is actually like not going to darken anything. And it looks incredible, and then just investing, I bought this vintage leopard sofa here, which was kind of a large investment for me. But I need a couch in my office because I just for creative purposes, it's just nice to be able to like cozy in a little bit. And it's already made such a difference, and it's easier to have my team kind of meet in here because of that. And so there are these things that I think the important thing is really just to try to get to the heart of like what will make the biggest impact, and then giving yourself permission to do that, to execute that, to invest in that. And again, I make mistakes. I mean, this desk that I have my computer on right now was a hand-me-down from our last office space. And so I was like, I don't want this man's desk anymore. I deserve a better desk, you know? But then I ended up buying like a really boring, lackluster, cheap desk from IKEA, which is, I love IKEA. Don't get me wrong. But I was like, that doesn't even feel like that's not an upgrade. Like, what are you doing? You know? And so I ended up like dragging this whole big executive desk back into my space. And like I said, I'm just happy that I wasn't too proud to do that, to admit to that mistake. But the biggest thing for me is number one, that I grew up in scarcity. I am constantly pushing back against feelings of scarcity. And yet I chose this career path where literally my entire job is to spend money uh, because I sell merchandise. So I have to buy merchandise to sell. And I kind of realized that like maybe after the first year of my business, like I don't know why I thought the spending money would like stop at some point, you know, when it just truly escalates. um, and so probably a year in, I was like, oh, so this job is literally just spending money. And so I really have to like get in right relationship with that idea. Um, and it's a daily battle still. But again, it's a little bit easier when you have a staff full of angels and you're spending money to pay them. That feels great. You know, it feels great when I'm stocking my store with things made by people who I know, who are friends of mine, who are just people trying to survive in this world, making beautiful things. You know, I think the only thing we really stock from like a corporate supplier would be the books, the mass produced books that we carry. Everything else is like truly made by people, um, individuals in most cases. That feels great. But I had to step into that energy and I have to step into it all the time. And so when it is about stuff that doesn't directly translate to, okay, I'm paying people, okay, I'm buying merchandise, it's very hard to not feel irresponsible. It's very hard to not feel like, well, I don't need to spend that money. So it's irresponsible of me to do it, especially if it's for a project that I find like just fun, you know, or aesthetically pleasing. But at the end of the day, like I'm in the business of aesthetics and I'm in the business of vibes and energy. And investing in that is not irresponsible. But like I said, it's something that I have to push back against. But you know, there's the very practical sort of return on the investment of like we got a lot of views on social media of our, you know, like makeover process. You know, my blog got a lot of readers and I really brought up what I think is important stuff to talk about in that blog post, which is scarcity and community and relying on other people and relying on, um, you know, knowledge that maybe you're not even conscious of. And so to me, that's a win right there. You know, my staff is obviously super excited to work up here. They were anyways, but now they're even more excited. I'm more excited to work up here. I spend so much time in this office. This is my dream office. Um, I've never had an office before. I managed small businesses throughout college and grad school, and I never had my own office. And I love being in here and I do feel really productive in here. And I don't feel as scared to tackle horrible admin tasks. And if that isn't worth its weight in gold, I don't know what is, you know? So I think it's definitely about trust. You know, it's about trust in the universe that your investment sort of like will pay off and that faith in myself that I know what I'm doing, you know, which again is like maybe the hardest thing, like maybe the part of my witchcraft practice that I have to devote the most energy to, you know, just that I'm not a fraud, and I'm not an imposter, right? I would also just say if you are a person that struggles with scarcity, or coming from humble means, follow Money Witch on Instagram, buy her book, which is coming out next week. She's a friend of mine. Jessie Susannah is truly magic and has definitely helped me to step outside of some of these, unhealthy paradigms, which are truly just come straight out of capitalism and patriarchy, right? I mean, patriarchy loves nothing more than making fun of what women spend money on. Like, truly, it's like its favorite thing. It's like, oh, you're like into domestic shit. Well, you're an idiot. Like, I mean, it's just this like really
while also profiting off of it immensely.
Immensely. I mean, that's one of the other things that I find really fascinating, even just over the last like 10 years since I started HausWitch as a blog, is that the commodification of things like home, of things like autumn is a really good example, right? And it's like the pumpkin spice latte of it all, right? We weren't really talking about how obsessed everybody just like naturally is with autumn until Starbucks came out with that pumpkin spice latte. And then we all started buying pumpkin candles. And then we all started buying winter candles. And I love it because that is so my vibe. And that's like what I'm into. But just how much it's exploded over the last 10 years, which again is like problematic in some ways, right? Because it's like we're made, now this like beautiful idea of like honoring the domestic and honoring things like seasons and stuff like that is so commodified that now we're filling landfills with our, autumnal scented candle jars or whatever it is. So there's always this kind of like flip side to things. But I think that when you are putting intention into how you kind of celebrate these things, there's definitely ways of doing it. Like I said, with, whether it's buying vintage furniture or at least sort of sourcing your tools and your goodies from places that, are in more right relationship with the earth and with people who manufacture these things and so on and so forth. You're definitely doing less harm, the least amount of harm, I would think.
Love it. And, just to mention Jessie Susannah Money Witch, by the time this comes out, I think we'll have just a few episodes ago. She will have been on the show. So, and we get into her new book and into so much good money stuff. So love that you brought her up.
I started working with her actually on the spring equinox, the year that I opened the store. So it was just like a couple months before I opened the store, and the worlds that she opened for me just in that first conversation. And now, obviously we meet a few times a year, for like check-ins related to the business and stuff like that. And, I can't express her genius enough. So I'm happy to hear she was on.
Super fun. So yeah, there's, and you've touched on this here in what you've just been sharing, but also in your blog post, you were talking about how some of that scarcity and some of that fear was also coming from that. Is it okay to spend money on this, and how that is actually, capitalist beliefs or patriarchal and supremacist beliefs around like spending money on self-care and on comfort isn't actually, I don't know what the right word is, isn't actually safe or good or right. I don't know. Do you want to get into that a little more?
Yeah, I mean, like I was saying, I mean, capitalism just like loves to demean comfort, it seems like. But like you said, while also like profiting off of it in a major way. But I think that if you think about the fact that the dominant culture is, cis, het, white Christian men who, until fairly recently have never had to question their existence, their interests, their motivations, their impact on the world, their perspective to anyone for hundreds of years, then it's not really surprising that things that people who aren't that are interested in would be demeaned. But it's our job, I think, individually and obviously collectively as well, but in this context, sort of individually, just to ask those questions of like, well, why would, this hegemonic culture have a problem with this? Oh, obviously, because it undermines these ideas that I'm supposed to grind myself into dust to justify making a living, I'm supposed to compete with everybody around me and not prioritize community. I am supposed to really be ashamed of my femininity. I think about this is definitely a tangent, but I think about this every time I go through, which I'm going to have to go through next week, the TSA security checkpoints at the airport. And I don't have a quart size bag of 2-ounce bottles. I have a gallon size bag because I, adorn myself in ways traditionally gendered feminine. That is a lot of bottles. That requires a lot of bottles. Okay. I've got makeup. I've got skin serums. I've got gem essences. I've got, and every once in a while, a male TSA agent will call me out and say, you're only supposed to have a quart size of these. And I'm like, I'm not the patriarchy. I didn't determine that I am supposed to have beautiful, glowing skin and long, supple hair. I am just living in this world, doing my best to succeed in it, which involves playing into it in this way with personal grooming, right? And so it's kind of like that, where it's just like, okay, you built this city. I'm trying to live in it, and you're insulting me for it. Well, I'm not accepting that. And but there's so much shame, right? I mean, like when that first started happening to me, I felt so much shame around it. Like I was just like, God, I'm like so ugly that I need all this stuff, and or I'm so superficial that I even care. All this stuff when it's like, no, I'm just trying to be successful in this world that for me as like a visible figure, like I feel more comfortable when I look a certain way, being seen a certain way. And so it demands all of these products of me. So first of all, I'm going to invest all this money in this industry that I don't even agree with or like, but am participating in. And then I'm going to get teased about it by the damn TSA agent. And it's just like, come on. So I think for me, I just like reached a breaking point at a certain point where I was like, is it that everything I like and I'm into and like want to invest in and spend money on is like lame? Or do I think that this culture is and what we have built, what men have built over thousands of years is bullshit and lame? The second one. It's the second one. Spoiler alert. And so and yeah, so I talk about that in that blog post, especially, as it pertains to, when I was a kid wanting to invest in tarot cards and, witchy stuff and whatever. And, luckily I had parents who were very accommodating of all of that, sort of in principle. But again, I grew up with many, many stories around being irresponsible with money because that is, they were like, well, that's what you want to spend your money on. We're not going to like get in the way from a principle perspective. But, it does seem irresponsible to spend your whole allowance on a cast iron cauldron or something. And those little nudges throughout the years can really shape a person, and really those messages, which we get bombarded with all the time, definitely, shape you. And they've definitely shaped me. And I have had to do a lot of unlearning around all of it and still am doing that.
A lot of unlearning. Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. 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 Yes.
Did that answer the question, or did I just go on a random tangent about the TSA because I'm mad about my trip already next week? I'm like preemptively mad already.
How are you supposed to fit all that in a little court? Yeah.
can't fit that in a quart. I mean, I've
without
got
checking
hair,
your bag for $35. So
right, right. It's like, I don't even want you to know how much personal grooming products that I have, but now you make us pay to check bags too. So yeah.
pretty dumb. Yeah. Oh, got to get that TSA pre-check if you don't have it though. Just saying.
Yeah,
It's
no, good
awesome.
call. I have to do a few trips this year, so that's a good idea.
Definitely worth it. Yeah. I guess this is probably a world you're kind of rolling into as someone who is a purveyor of goods that are perceived in this way. So you're probably like, this is your world, your life. You gotta, and I think something that with the kind of commodification of autumn and even the witch aesthetic and all, it's become cool. And I've seen so many people on different sides in different camps.
Well, it's always been cool. I have to correct you there. It's always been
have
cool.
to agree there. Yeah, exactly. And I'm 38, so I'm not far behind you. And being a child of the 90s, right? Coming of age of the 90s, and the 90s are back in. I'm like, yes, finally, I'm cool again.
Yeah, totally.
But I cool in that way. But seeing this. It's interesting to see how much kind of, I don't know if infighting is the right word there is, but kind of judgment thrown around for people who just want the superficial witch look. And then other people who are like, well, this is a gateway into deeper awareness potentially. So who cares? I don't know. Is that something that you have to kind of face and come up against in your business?
Yeah, I mean, but again, mostly just from people sort of in the community. I was talking about this with my wife this morning, that it's kind of unfortunate, really, that infighting definitely exists and is really unfortunate. And, I was saying that sometimes I hold back from posting some things that might be seen as kind of radical. And it's not because of the other side that I'm worried about taking hits from or taking shit from. It's people within this community who I think either feel like they don't have an outlet to really sort of fight back against, again, these big kind of systemic forces that are really the issue, right? And so they pick on people who, they know aren't gonna maybe fight back, or just who will be able to receive it in a different way. And in terms of the commercialization of all of it, because I definitely get asked about this, and I definitely, and people have accused us of kind of trying to ride this wave of this trend or whatever. And it's it's definitely, you touched on this. It's I found witchcraft through the movie The Craft. I mean, again, I've been interested in tarot cards and runes and divination. And, my favorite movie when I was a very little was The Worst Witch, starring our queen Fairuza Balk and Tim Curry. I have been into witch culture my entire life, for sure. But I really started exploring it through our good friend Barnes and Noble. I was in the Barnes and Noble, and I know almost every witch I know is oh yeah, I was in that Barnes and Noble witchcraft section, chilling throughout my whole teenage years.
Esoteric new age, what's up?
Oh, so it's who am I to judge how somebody else gets into this, And again, there's obviously a spectrum. When Sephora was selling the kits with the sage and rose quartz, and no, of course I don't love that. And of course I think it's shitty that, people are still not paying attention to the harm that is caused by, people over harvesting things like sage and Palo Santo, and not paying, enough attention to, the cultural appropriation of it all and stuff like that. But again, at the same time, I'm thinking about myself as a teenager going into Sephora and having the choice between like this cool ritual kit and beauty products that are just meant to make me feel inherently inferior, right? Because that's like the whole thing. And again, I think a lot of people, myself included, get empowerment out of like beauty practices and stuff like that. And I came up in high-end hair salons. Those were the businesses that I managed. So I am deeply entrenched in the beauty industry. But I mean, Sephora freaks me out. It's like way too much for me. But um and I can't necessarily be too mad that there is this option um for, you know, younger me to choose the witchcraft kit over, you know, like some bullshit that's going to make me maybe feel bad about myself. Um so it's very nuanced. And that's what's unfortunate, right? And that's what I think we see with this infighting is that so much of it's such a blessing that social media came along and, you know, witches of Instagram came along and really created the space for this culture to just blow up. And that's incredible and that's amazing. But of course it is going to flatten some of these ideas. And like we were talking about at the beginning, like the witch contains multitudes. All of these ideas contain multitudes. There's so much nuance. There's so many different angles to look at. There's so many different ways of approaching this. And the problem, you know, like I said, with social media is that it just like flattens all of those things to being like either you're for the Sephora kit or you're against it. And, you know, there's nothing in between. Either you are, you know, and there's this whole gotcha culture where people just like love to point out that they're, you know, like more woke than you or like whatever it is. And I am here to say that um, so many times that I have seen things either on our feed or on other feeds having to do with cultural appropriation or race or any of these types of things. It's not. It's coming from white folks who aren't super well informed themselves, and you know, I just and again, like, I mean, I think that obviously as white folks, it's definitely our job to step in and say things and not make people of color do that work, of course.
Right. There's this toxic allyship, though. Quote allyship.
Thank you. That's a great, yes. Toxic allyship, I think, unfortunately is running rampant to an extent in this community. And you know, it's unfortunate, but I think that it's just indicative of the wider culture of social media and not necessarily like witches and witchcraft. But those are definitely, you know, things that come up. And I just wish that more people would be putting their energy towards like talking about fucking Walmart, you know, than like my witch store where I like, you know, just like pay 6 like queer witches to work and, you know, like, you know, try to exist outside of toxic capitalism as much as possible, you know, and you're going to like nitpick, you know, what organization we're donating to, versus like talking about like the millions of different ways that big companies exploit people. And, you know, we have a saying around here, which is who's watching the Nazis, you know, like if you're in our business trying to nitpick, trying to play gotcha games, who's watching the Nazis, guys? Like we're all, and I think we've seen that over the last couple of years, this rise of this element that I, as a history major, cannot believe we are seeing again. But we aren't focused. The resistance is not focused, and the resistance is infighting, and the resistance is getting caught up in some of these issues, which I'm not trying to say there aren't important things that need to be talked about in these conversations at all, of course. But I think a little bit more of a critical look at how we are engaging as a community, how we're coming together as a community rather than finding things to tear us apart. That's exactly what they want. That's exactly what social media was built for, and keeping that in mind. And I think that's really, I think that, you know, the witches of Instagram as a trend, I think has peaked. And I think what will happen now, what I'm excited to, continue the conversation around is, okay, but where did we build a really, really necessary and thriving community that is having really important conversations about capitalism, about the planet and climate change, about human exploitation, animal exploitation. And I think more so than anywhere else, those conversations are happening amongst witches, because I think we have the best ability to see outside and around it as the outsiders, just to like, oh my gosh, I actually like managed to bring this all together, from the beginning. But I think that's the really important thing about identifying as a witch, or just, being interested in or having a witchcraft practice, is that as the sort of perpetual outsider, we have this ability to see the hegemonic dominant culture for what it is, which is really harming and exploiting everything. So, yeah.
I love that though, and that really puts in perspective the gift of being an outsider, because I think so often the outsider story is one of pain and struggle, which is true, but the gift is.
I feel so blessed. I feel so blessed to be an outsider and to willingly make 10 million tiny choices a day in resistance to the narratives and the motivations that are put upon all of us by these structures like patriarchy and capitalism and white supremacy. I'm here to tell you that, yeah, that is probably the most important, what I see as the most important part of being a witch, is making those choices every single day with everything I do as much as I can, just to operate in resistance. I think that's the key to 21st century witchcraft.
Sweet. Yeah. And I love I do love how you wrapped it up back up to what we started with around that. And I think what that infighting and kind of that like just judgment and tearing apart from within also speaks to part of why people are probably afraid and doubting about whether they can even call themselves a witch, or whether that's even okay for them to explore. And so, I think I'm hearing from you, and something that at Earthspeak we hold as well is offering more of a welcoming and like welcome in and explore. And it's I feel like when someone enters into this realm and does find a friendly guide, they're naturally going to care and give a shit about the bigger systemic issues and get and learn about these things and be like, okay, that even though I made a mistake and I bought, shitty appropriated sage in the past, I know better now and I can do better, and I don't have to put others down to do better. I can do better by taking different actions and having an impact on the system and whatever, like there's other ways. It doesn't have to be this way. So I just love everything you said and feeling fired up. And I'm feeling really fired up. I'm like, shit, we probably got to talk about history, but not today because we don't have time.
This is what I'm saying. The witch contains so many multitudes, and I love to talk about all of them. And so it's definitely, yeah.
So good. So good. Well, this is really juicy. Thanks for all your sharing. And I'd love to hear, is there anything else that you want to touch on before we wrap up? And just give you that space, and there doesn't have to be.
No, I mean, I think just like for anybody that is interested in getting more into this stuff, well, we have an amazing community page on our website that is 100% free resources, articles written by my amazing staff, by me, by guest witches. And you can start dabbling in or figuring out exactly like what you're interested in. We get emails and DMs and just all forms of communication all the time of how do I get started? And I think one of the most important things to get started is to tap into that intuition. And you do that by just letting yourself be interested in what you're interested in, what comes up for you. And no, there is no wrong answers, you know? I mean, unless you're causing someone harm. Literally, that is the only thing you can do wrong. And I sometimes I feel like our customers or followers might be a little frustrated with us because we really love to say that there's like no wrong answers and that like however you want to interact with the crystal is great, you know, whatever magical correspondences like you feel with something, like don't prioritize a book written by a stranger over your own feeling. And I know that there are a lot of people out there that really just want to be told like what to do and like what, you know, herb corresponds with their, you know, Mercury and Gemini or whatever it is, which I have a Mercury and Gemini. And I don't know what herb corresponds best with that, you know, and that's okay. So I would just say, like, a really good practice to get into is just getting to know yourself and what you're interested in, because I think you'd be surprised how disconnected we all are from those ideas sometimes, and especially when we're just getting started. So,
For sure. Thanks for that. And what do you offer? Where can people go to find you and your wares and such?
yeah, so our website with our online store that ships worldwide is housewitchstore.com. You can do housewitch.com too, it'll redirect you. Um, and we are on Instagram at HausWitch. On TikTok, we just started venturing into the realm of TikTok, and bless, I have a younger millennial who's able to run that for me. I think it's HausWitch Shop, HausWitch Store, also, just like the website. Um, I have my own Instagram account called HausWitch at Home, which is just a little bit more personal. Once the business really started to take off, I didn't really feel like as much of my personal voice made sense coming through. So I started HausWitch at Home. And then the thing I'm very, very excited about is around the spring equinox, we are launching our new line of ritual cleaning products called Counter Magic. And you can follow us on Instagram at counter.magic. And there's a link to sign up for our email list. We are creating the website as we speak, basically. So that will all be happening in the next couple weeks. And I'm very excited about that. So
Super cool. I know we didn't even touch on cleaning, but obviously you're gonna have to come back sometime and party with some more
totally.
history and ritual cleaning and such. So thanks so much for coming on the show today and just sharing a peek into behind the scenes of your life and HausWitch and for what you do. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Thanks for what you do.
All the roads are windy.
Listen to over 200 free Earthspeak podcast episodes on your favorite podcast app and visit earthspeak.love to learn about our collective community and workshops.